In 1847, a doctor discovered that something as simple as washing your hands before delivering a baby could dramatically reduce the number of mothers dying in childbirth. The medical establishment called him insane. They locked him in an asylum. He died there, never knowing that decades later, the entire world would realize he was right. So that raises a question. If washing hands was only discovered in 1847, what were doctors doing before that? Who were the first people in history to ever call themselves doctors? And what did medicine even look like at the very beginning? That's what this video is about. The first person in history we can call a doctor lived 4,500 years ago in ancient Egypt. His name was Imhotep. He wasn't born into power. He was a commoner, the son of an architect. But he was so gifted that he eventually became the second most powerful man in Egypt, behind only the pharaoh himself. What made him a doctor wasn't magic, it was the opposite. While every other healer in Egypt blamed illness on gods and demons, Imhotep looked at the body and asked, what is actually happening here? He treated wounds with sutures. He splinted broken bones. He used honey to prevent infection, something we now know actually works because honey kills bacteria. He died around 2600 BC. 2,000 years later, the Egyptians made him a god, all because of a commoner who decided to look at the human body with clear eyes. But Imhotep never cut anyone open. The first person in history to actually perform surgery lived about 2,000 years later in India around 600 BC. His name was Sushruta. Here's why he started doing surgery. In ancient India, cutting off a criminal's nose was a standard punishment. Adultery, theft, betrayal, your nose was gone. And in that society, a missing nose wasn't just disfigurement, it was a public mark. Everyone would know what you'd done forever. Sushruta looked at these people and asked, can I give them their nose back? And then he figured out how. He would take a leaf and measure the exact size of the missing nose, cut a flap of skin from the patient's forehead or cheek, leaving one end still attached so blood could flow through it. Then rotate that flap down and stitch it into place. He even inserted 2 small tubes to keep the nostrils open while it healed. That technique, the forehead flap, is still used in reconstructive surgery today. For most of human history, surgery meant being fully awake while someone cut into your body. Patients were held down. They screamed. Sometimes they died from the shock alone. Surgeons were judged by how fast they could work, not how good they were, because every second on the table was agony. That changed on March 30th, 1842, in a small town in Georgia. A doctor named Crawford Long had noticed something at parties. People who inhaled ether felt no pain, even when they hurt themselves. He had an idea. His patient, James Venable, had a tumor on his neck and had been putting off surgery because he was terrified of the pain. Venable inhaled ether from a cloth and then Long removed the tumor. Venable felt nothing. But here's the tragic part. Long was so careful, so afraid of being wrong, that he didn't publish his findings for 7 years. And while he waited, a dentist in Boston named William Morton performed the same procedure publicly in 1846. The newspapers covered it. The world celebrated Morton. Crawford Long, the man who actually did it first, spent decades fighting for recognition he never fully received in his lifetime. Now back to where we started. 1847, Vienna, a hospital where 1 in 5 mothers was dying after childbirth. The doctors couldn't explain it. They blamed bad air. They blamed the patients. They blamed fate. A young Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis noticed something. The ward run by doctors had a death rate 3 times higher than the ward run by midwives. The only difference, doctors came straight from dissecting corpses to delivering babies without washing their hands. Midwives didn't do autopsies. Semmelweis made every doctor and student wash their hands in a chlorinated solution before touching a patient. The death rate fell from 18% to 1% almost overnight. He had just saved thousands of lives with soap and water. The medical establishment refused to believe him. They said he was wrong. They said he was arrogant. They said the idea that a doctor's hands could kill a patient was an insult to the profession. Semmelweis spent years writing desperate letters, begging colleagues to listen. The rejection slowly destroyed him. He was showing signs of a mental breakdown, depressed, erratic, increasingly desperate. In 1865, he was committed to a mental asylum. He died there 2 weeks later from an infected wound on his right hand. hand, never knowing that within a few decades, the entire world would adopt the rule he had spent his life fighting for. Medicine didn't arrive fully formed. It was invented, one idea at a time, by people who looked at suffering and refused to accept it as normal. Most of them weren't celebrated. Some of them were punished for being right.